Good evening and welcome to Gunner Shot. Good evening once again. You see with me, General Hasnain. Sir, good evening and welcome to you. And today we are going to talk of a very important topic which you had written about. Uh, as you rightly said, our Prime Minister had given a very important, interview with the Newsweek, where he had indicated certain, you know, overtures to, if I may say, to China, and it somehow never caught anyone's imagination, like you rightly mentioned in your article. And then I've been analyzing this whole story otherwise from a different point of view because I've been studying China intimately. I felt that India and China are getting into some kind of a Cold War kind of a situation. Now, to put things in perspective and then, hand it over to you, I've always felt, sorry, yeah, I've always felt that there are four states which two countries could be in: hot war, cold war, or a hot peace and cold peace. Hot peace is something like what we were during the Eastern Ladakh situation. Where are we today? Are we in a cold war or are we heading into a cold peace? Definitely not in a peaceful situation, but somewhere there. Now, it is in this that article had come out, and this is the reaction of the Global Times, right? And he's, two articles where he says Modi urges to urgently address prolonged situation on borders with China. And then a positive thing, Modi's remark on China-India relations are thought-provoking. And this is a Global Times editorial. I've just shown you the headlines. But promptly the very next day, South China Morning Post comes up and says, China-India border conflict, not the entirety of relations. Steady ties benefit both. Where they've gone back to the traditional thing that, look, the border can take a back seat. The other things have to come forward, right? It's some kind of a hot and cold reaction. And then, of course, New York Times came out with this edition. China had a special place in Modi's heart. Now it's a thorn in his side. So you see this thing between cold peace and a cold war somewhere there. And I will come to this a little later. But this is a background and your wonderful article which you've written and lack of discussion in the strategic circles. I think this needs to be discussed whether we are in a cold peace or a cold war. But I'd like to hear your views first on this whole thing and your background, and then we'll discuss it. Sir. All yours.
Jai Hind. Thank you, General Shankar. That was very interesting, and I'm very happy that this subject is being touched upon because, as you just said yourself, मैंने भी बहुत इंतजार किया 11 अप्रैल को ये इंटरव्यू हुआ था प्राइम मिनिस्टर मोदी जी का और न्यूज़वीक में न्यूज़वीक इज इंटरनेशनली सच एन इम्पोर्टेंट मैगजीन मगर ये भारत में कुछ इसके ऊपर कुछ ज्यादा डिस्कशन नहीं हुआ आई वाज सरप्राइज्ड एक्चुअली most people seem to have taken it upon themselves that India and China are just made to be enemies, right? हम एडवर्सरी हैं और एडवर्सरी रहेंगे मेरे ख्यालात थोड़े अलग हैं आई हैव ऑलवेज फेल्ट कि ये सिर्फ ट्रस्ट की बात है और चाइना और इंडिया के लिए दोनों के लिए जगह है स्ट्रेटेजिक स्पेस है एशिया में क्योंकि दोनों वहां पर रह सकते हैं और दोनों इसका फायदा उठा सकते हैं एक दूसरे की सिक्योरिटी को एक्चुअली वो अश्योर कर सकते हैं मगर क्योंकि ये इतना ट्रस्ट डेफिसिट है हमारे बीच में उसकी वजह से वो जो क्लोजनेस होनी चाहिए वो नहीं आ पाती तो आई टुक इट अपॉन माय सेल्फ कि इसको मैं देखता हूँ इस आर्टिकल को कैसे हम ये जो हुआ है इंटरव्यू उसको हम कैसे किस निगाह से देख सकते हैं सो आई लुक इट अपॉन इट दिस वे कि देखिए 2014 में जब प्राइम मिनिस्टर मोदी आए थे पावर में उनका बैकग्राउंड भी था बड़ा पॉजिटिव था अबाउट चाइना. उन्होंने 3-4 विजिट्स की थी चाइना की, एंड ही had a very positive kind of response from there. तो जब वो प्राइम मिनिस्टर बने, हेड ऑफ गवर्नमेंट बने भारत में, it was a natural thing that he approached this whole issue with a sense of positivity. वो जो उनको रिस्पॉन्स मिला वहां से, चाइना से, वो उस पॉजिटिविटी के साथ नहीं था. मे बी थोड़ा जिंजरली जिसको कहते हैं, ना इधर के ना उधर के, थोड़ा थोड़ा लेस ऑफ वार्मथ उनको, मगर रिस्पॉन्स मिला. चाइनीज प्रेसिडेंट आए, जब आए यहाँ पर, तो साथ साथ लाइन ऑफ एक्चुअल कंट्रोल के ऊपर भी कुछ एक्शन हो रहा था पीएलए का. उस वक्त मैसेजिंग कर रहे थे. चीन की ये खासियत है, आप जानते हैं, आप तो बहुत पढ़ते हैं चीन को. खासियत ये है, हर एक्शन के अंदर उनका कोई कुछ और चीज जो है वो छिपी रहती है. सब मैसेजिंग जो है वो उसके अंदर रहती है. साथ मैसेजिंग उस वक्त वो क्लियरली ये थी कि देखिए, हम मिलिट्री इशू को देख रहे हैं, हम लाइन ऑफ एक्चुअल कंट्रोल को देख रहे हैं, ये हिमालयन सेक्टर जो रीजन है, इसकी सिक्योरिटी हमने इसके अभी तक बॉर्डर को रिजॉल्व नहीं किया है, एटसेट्रा एटसेट्रा. सालों मुद्दतों से भारत को कहते आ रहा है कि लेट्स रिजॉल्व द बॉर्डर. वी हैड सो मेनी राउंड्स ऑफ टॉक्स, बट आपने आज तक तो कभी लाइन ऑफ एक्चुअल कंट्रोल की जो आपकी आपका परसेप्शन है उसका एक मैप तक नहीं दिया, और हमारा डिमांड रहते हुए आपके साथ ये रहा है. This thing has been going on for many years. It was now very clear the Chinese were getting into a trap. Okay, yeah, you have an Indian Prime Minister here, forthcoming, bold in his approach, and wanting peace. And the Chinese were feeling very awkward about it. कुछ हद तक वो embarrassed भी हो रहे थे. और मैं समझा कि उस वक्त जो कुछ हुआ 2020 में, 2017 में पहले डोकलाम के साथ, और फिर 2020 में ईस्ट लद्दाख में, ये वर्चुअली आउट ऑफ कॉन्टेक्स्ट था, मगर प्राइमरीली इसका इंटेंशन ये था कि भारत को अपनी जगह दिखाए और हमारे एंथुजियाज्म के ऊपर भी कुछ हद तक रोक लगाए. और ये भी देखें कि देखिए, चीन अभी भी जो है वो बड़ा देश है, वो पोटेंशियल सुपर पावर है, भारत को अपनी जगह पर रहना चाहिए. और ये भी कि एक मैसेज ऑफ कॉशन भारत को देना चाहा कि आप अगर अमेरिका, जापान, ऑस्ट्रेलिया, इन सब के साथ ये करते रहेंगे तो आपका हमारे साथ जो है अनबन रहेगी. दिस वाज द मैसेजिंग व्हिच वाज गिवन आउट. आई थिंक द प्राइम मिनिस्टर वाज वेरी सेंसिबल. 4 साल तक प्राइम मिनिस्टर नरेंद्र मोदी ने कोई बात नहीं की इसके ऊपर. ठीक है, एक ग्रे जोन बना के रखा जिसके ऊपर आमतौर पे आर्मी चीफ कभी बात करते थे, डिफेंस मिनिस्टर बात करते थे, फॉरेन मिनिस्टर बात करते थे, मगर फाइनली जाकर 10-11 अप्रैल को उन्होंने खुद ने इसके ऊपर बातचीत की और एक मैसेज भेजा, पॉजिटिव मैसेज. इससे चीन के ऊपर प्रेशर पड़ा. Now China, having experienced full foreign diplomacy, this that realized it has not been successful at all. Realized that India, they have actually irked India. They have got India gingered up into a military situation in which they are making progress. They are willing to devote much more resources to their armed forces, etc. And this can go out of hand completely. I have been one of the advocates जो हर दफे कहते आया हूँ, यहाँ लड़ाई नहीं होगी, हिमालयन रीजन पे कोई लड़ाई नहीं होगी. ये चीन जो है चाहता है, जानता है, और चीन को मालूम है कि लड़ाई को जीतना भी इतना आसान नहीं होगा उसको. वो सिर्फ चाह रहा था कि भारत को अपनी जगह दिखाए और कुछ. प्राइम मिनिस्टर मोदी ने इस मैसेज के साथ सिर्फ इतना कहा है कि देखिए, देयर इज पोटेंशियल फॉर पीस. और मेरा तरीका देखने का, कोल्ड पीस, कोल्ड वॉर को देखने का तरीका ये है कि प्रीसीडिंग ए पोटेंशियल पीस there will be an era, a period of Cold War. वो कोल्ड वॉर में हम ऑलरेडी हैं एक्चुअली इन अ वे. और वो आप समझिए सिमेंटिक्स की बात है, कोल्ड वॉर या कोल्ड पीस कहिए इसको, मगर ये थोड़े दिनों चलता रहेगा. क्योंकि एक तो स्थिति दुनिया की ऐसी है इस वक्त के ग्लोबल रीसेट हो रहा है. नॉर्थ साउथ अलग अलग जो है इक्वेशंस बन रहे हैं. आप देख रहे हैं नॉर्थ कोरिया, रशिया, चाइना, ईरान किस तरह से नॉर्थ की तरफ, साउथ की तरफ एक अलग अमेरिकन लेड पूरा इक्वेशन जो बन रहा है, ये बन रहा है इस वक्त. देयर इज नथिंग सर्टन येट। मगर जैसे ही ये बन रहा है, जब तक ये बनता रहेगा तब तक ये पीरियड ऑफ कोल्ड वॉर कोल्ड पीस चलेगी। आई वुड से मोर टेंडिंग टुवर्ड्स कोल्ड पीस, डिफाइन इट सबसे टुवर्ड्स कोल्ड पीस। और ये शुरुआत है, जो प्राइम मिनिस्टर मोदी ने लिया है ये एक इनिशिएटिव है, और ज्यादा आगे नहीं गए हैं वो इस इनिशिएटिव। ही हैज टेकन द राइट स्टेप के थोड़ा कहा है और अवेट किया है रिस्पॉन्स। ग्लोबल टाइम्स का रिस्पॉन्स भी पॉजिटिव रहा है, उसने भी कुछ ज्यादा नहीं कहा है। दिस इज जस्ट द पेरिफेरल्स जो मिलते हैं शुरू शुरू में, बस ये है अभी तक यहाँ पर। वी मे नॉट रीड टू मच इनटू इट, बट एट द सेम टाइम इफ यू डोंट रीड एनीथिंग इनटू इट, तो मैं समझता हूँ कि ये ज्यादा ज्यादती होगी, क्योंकि इस तरह के इंडिकेटर्स जो है आमतौर पर जियो पॉलिटिक्स में इतनी आसानी से आते नहीं। अरेस्ट में केस
या आई थिंक सो सर, आपने जो बोला है कि ये इट इज, ये जितना भी हुआ है, इट इज नॉट एज पर द नॉर्मल विच हैज गॉन इन द पास्ट 4 years. इट्स अ लिटिल आउट ऑफ द I wouldn't say the normal, it's a little out of syllabus what the Prime Minister has done. He's given an indication that look, there could be a thaw, right? And at a point of time when we are under elections. And that's interesting. You see, the point is he's given it at a time when our elections are underway, and he's probably signaling to China that is there a new start once the elections are over and the new government comes, or whichever government comes. It's for China to ponder. Right. The response from the Global Times was quite positive, but immediately after that, like I said, the South China Morning Post went back to its old story, and New York Times came out with its story, which encapsulates the whole thing. Now let's look at the some of the drivers which I had identified and a few issues of our relationship which drive the Cold War, Cold Peace, whatever you call it, right? And this is what it is. You know, when you look at the drivers of India-China Cold War, there's a traditional view in China that India does not count. There's a fact of unwinnability of kinetic wars in the Himalayas, which you also said. And the border issue has been a main driver between our relations, frozen relations, if I may say. The new factor which is coming in is India's growth is at China's cost. Ever since 2020, this has been the story. And then there is this Chinese ambition of being a global, regional, and an actor in the Indian Ocean region. It encroaches Indian space on one issue, and it is also getting inhibited by India's rise, because as India rises, the overall space also is getting, for global governance is getting impacted. Then there's this US Russia factor. And which way does China look at this whole story? And which way India does look at the whole story? Now, let me amplify this for 1 minute, sir. The Chinese feel aggrieved of how the US treats Chinese as far as their relationship with Russia is concerned. And they feel even more aggrieved that India has even better relations with Russia but is not penalized by USA. And India is allowed to do what it wants. So that factor does play. And then, of course, Pakistan and China impinging into our neighborhood. And then the Chinese nuclear expansion which is taking place. These, I thought, were the drivers of the China-India Cold War. I'd request your views on it because and amplify your things and your thought process. These are just pointers, right? How I look at it, your views.
थैंक यू। आपने बड़े अच्छी तरीके से, बड़ी तरतीब के साथ इन बुलेट पॉइंट्स को पेश किया है यहाँ पर। मैं सबके ऊपर टिप्पणी नहीं करूंगा, एक दो के ऊपर करता हूँ, थोड़ा ब्रॉडर explanation and nothing more. What actually sums up this entire thing is this issue of rising Indian confidence, strategic confidence. ये पूरी दुनिया में ये एक्सपेक्टेड नहीं था। भारत की इकोनॉमिक राइज की कहानी दूसरी थी, which took place earlier, as we are all aware. बट ये 2014 के बाद ये न्यू फाउंड स्ट्रेटेजिक कॉन्फिडेंस विच वाज समथिंग मिसिंग इन अ सिस्टम ऑल दीज इयर्स. हम हर दफे कंप्लेन करते हैं फौज के अंदर भी, आपको मालूम है कि भारत का स्ट्रेटेजिक कल्चर बड़ा कमजोर है. हमारी लीडरशिप्स जो है वो समझ नहीं पाती हैं कि भारत की असलियत क्या है, असली पोजीशन कहाँ है, एक्सेट्रा. हमारी जियो स्ट्रेटेजिक लोकेशन जो है उसका फायदा नहीं उठा पाते हैं जिस तरह से पाकिस्तान ने अपनी जियो स्ट्रेटेजिक लोकेशन का फायदा उठाया है. All these thoughts have always been in our minds in the armed forces mostly. It's after 2014 that in a matter of 5-6 years, combination of factors जो थे, for example, the Hamana and Vishtok lab was handled, और कश्मीर के ऊपर बड़े जरा बोल्ड डिसीजंस लिए गए. 2019 में जिस तरह से डिसीजन लिया गया, सर्जिकल स्ट्राइक्स और बालाकोट स्ट्राइक्स चेंज द गेम, कंप्लीट गेम इन कश्मीर फ्रॉम अ स्ट्रेटेजिक एंगल. ये सब जब चीजें हुई तो ये मैसेज एक बहुत बड़ा गया पूरी दुनिया को कि इंडिया वाज चेंजिंग स्ट्रेटेजिकली, इट वाज रीगेनिंग गेनिंग अ न्यू कॉन्फिडेंस. I think whatever happened in this period of 2020, 2023 particularly, was China's response at the time of COVID. COVID was just a period which perhaps China thought that they could take advantage of. But I don't think they thought through this entirely. उन्होंने देखा कि ये एक अपॉर्चुनिटी है, भारत को दबाओ जरा, एक मैसेज भेजते हैं कि India is not a competent kind of a nation competent enough to be a part of strategic, international strategic equations as such. और उसके वजह से जो कुछ हुआ 2020 में हमको मालूम है, उसके बाद जैसे जैसे होता गया है, आई थिंक दे आर नाउ रियलाइजिंग धीरे धीरे कि वक्त आ गया है जब भारत की इकोनॉमी बढ़ेगी और साथ साथ उसकी स्ट्रेटेजिक कॉन्फिडेंस में और इजाफा आएगा. इट विल गो अप हायर and there is nothing to prevent India from rising. Therefore, this slight gingerly kind of a response which the Global Times came, and subsequently the rest of the media has not taken it up on so passionately, but ये कम से कम एक शुरुआत हुई है कि ये realization वहां पर गया है. Can I have the slide again? So I just want to see.
Yeah. Why not? Sure. Sorry.
ये slide बहुत बढ़िया slide है आपका इसके अंदर. ये यूएस रशिया फैक्टर, ये आपने बहुत अच्छा इसके अंदर लिखा है कि भारत काटसा के नीचे एक थ्रेट हुई थी एक जमाने में कि यूएस विल आल्सो इंपोज सैंक्शंस ऑन इंडिया. फिर देखा कि हमारी $5 बिलियन की डील जो थी S-400 की, उसके ऊपर भी कुछ नहीं हुआ. उसका भी इक्विपमेंट अभी तक आया जा रहा है. तेल के ऊपर कुछ नहीं हुआ है, ऑयल के ऊपर. मगर चाइना इज एक्सट्रीमली केयरफुल अबाउट giving any military wherewithal to Russia because it knows that sanctions on China, US sanctions and Western sanctions on China will have a paralyzing effect on the Chinese economy in the state that it is today, right? तो यहाँ पर आप देख सकते हैं कि हमारी अहमियत ऐसे ही बढ़ गई. Automatically, India's strategic importance has gone up also because of that. Pakistan is not a very major factor here, but of course, it does play a role in Sino-Indian relations. It's a balancing force somewhere or the other on the side, on China's side, and militarily, strategically, it does play. Of late, उसकी अहमियत थोड़ा कम हो गई है because of its own economy and things like that. But Pakistan will always remain relevant to this. आपने देखा कि यूक्रेनियन सिचुएशन में भी अमेरिका ने आखिर में पाकिस्तान से ही एमुनिशन लेकर यूक्रेन को दिया. $600 million वर्थ जो उनके पास दिया. आखिरी में ये जो नेबरहुड की बात है, देखिए ये दिस इज समथिंग जो मैं समझता हूँ भारत को, वी विल हैव टू लिव विद इट. इंडिया विल, द चाइनीज विल कंटिन्यू पेस्टरिंग अस, sort of pressurizing us on this, but they feel this is India's Achilles heel. ये जो पूरा बांग्लादेश, नेपाल, मालदीव्स, श्रीलंका, ये कंप्लीट जो सर्कल है, the famous what was called the string of pearls at one time, ये पूरा जो है ये भारत की Achilles heel है. इसके ऊपर प्रेशर जितना डालो उतना इंडिया जो है वो रिस्पॉन्ड करता है. And then India does not have that, we get sort of restricted to our regional neighborhood only, and we don't look outwards beyond so much at that time. That's a means of coercion, a means of pressurizing India, nothing more than that. तो मेरे ख्याल में this is just a beginning that has happened. It's a very good. I do not have a negativity about relations with China because I do feel कि ये जो कुछ हुआ है, it should be we should forget it, but be mentally prepared, be physically prepared at all times. Every nation needs a security that has to be done. No one, under no circumstances should we dilute ourselves on that. But the future of Indian growth is very largely contingent upon our relationship with China. And
Yeah,
that relationship is something that we should maintain.
yeah. So आपने जो भी बोला है उसके साथ सहमत हूँ मैं. I just want to highlight जो आपने बोला on the US China relationship कि it's a very important point जो आपने बताया. हाल ही में सेक्रेटरी ब्लिंकन has gone to China. He
Right.
met Xi Jinping and is just going back. In fact, it's almost on the thing. अभी उसके ऊपर टिप्पणी आ रहा है. And what the secretary Blinken has put down conditions. One of the major conditions he's put down is if you want normal relations, stop support to China, support to Russia. Now that is hitting China badly. But the larger issue is what you said a little later. If China wants to grow or expand or do anything, it has to depend on US consumption. If the US market is denied to China, China is suffering. And to highlight it, I would like to मैं सबको बताना चाहता हूँ आजकल चाइना से बहुत लोग उद्योगपति वगैरह मेक्सिको जाना चाहते हैं मेक्सिको जाके वहाँ कारोबार लगाना चाहते हैं क्यों लगाना चाहते हैं क्योंकि मेक्सिको इज अंडर नाफ्ता विद यूएसए फिर उसके जरिए टू एक्सेस यूएस मार्केट so if any one of us think that China has got tremendous amount of power I think we are in a wrong way of looking at it today I feel that China needs USA more than USA needs China. That's where it is. I just thought I'll highlight what you said.
Absolutely.
Okay. Now I've got a second set of points which I thought I'll put flash and highlight to you. When you look at the Cold War construct of the earlier time, what was it? It was all about geopolitical tensions because there were global geopolitical tensions. Uh, we had the Cold War then. Today also, there's something similar exists in the form of Ukraine, Gaza, South China Sea. There's also an ideological struggle between the two of us, democracy versus communism. And if you see the articles which are coming out from South China Morning Post, I'll just show them after this. You see how they're taking pot shots at India almost every second day. Then there's the issue of regional influence and being Asia centric. Nuclear arms. And there's something again which they have commented on increased military deployment, maritime contestation in the Indian Ocean region and in the Western Pacific. That earlier map which जो हमने दिखाया आप सबको right ये जो मैप अगर आप देखेंगे तो as much as China is having an outreach into India, India is also having an outreach in the Western Pacific, something which we have not, off late, we don't focus on it, whether it's with South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, Philippines, or Vietnam. It is no more that string of pearls that only it's a one-way story. And in places like Russia, Afghanistan, and Iran, we are on a common ground. We are contesting each other. We're contesting for strategic space there, whether someone accepts it or not. But that's a reality. Then, of course, there are partnerships. As you rightly said, there's a partnership, the Northern Partnership of Russia, China, Iraq, no, not Iran, and to some extent North Korea, which is in the forming. It's a little hazy, but it's there. But there's Quad on the other side. And then there's a constant effort of China to contain India through Pakistan and through Nepal, through Bangladesh and Myanmar. Then China collusion, and of course, there's a lot of propaganda and information war. You just look at this. I just go through the headlines of the South China Morning Post. All these headlines have come out after the Prime Minister's interview and their response. They're talking of TikTok, and then they're looking at why India should soon dethrone China as the world's top consumer market. They're worried about our rise, which you rightly said, right? And this is something which we've already dethroned them from being the biggest population. So the next thing is the consumer market, and ours is a consumer economy, and they are struggling for consumption. Okay, and then they feel that US-India ties are bound by shared interests, and they won't be marred by recent incidents. तू मैं कभी कभी जो इंडिया और यूएसए के बीच में चलता रहता है. And then of course they have these pot shots whether there are doubts, and they express doubts whether India will become a developed economy by 2047, that Viksit Bharat, which we are talking of. This is something which came out today. It says increased nuclearization from West Asia to North Korea. They've spoken about US versus China, Israel versus Iran, India versus Pakistan. But what they've underplayed and not spoken of is inherent in all this, there is a India China nuclear competition on, and especially when China is expanding its nuclear arsenal, right? It is already there. And then they keep saying that China can teach India lessons as if they're the bigger power. And then, of course, they talk of Maldives and things like that. If you see, while there is this effort by our Prime Minister to reach out to China in some manner, it might be small, but it is significant. And it's come after 4 years, which you rightly said. And that too from the head of the state. There has to be a response from that side. After the initial response from the Global Times, the rest of the response and all those points which I showed look as if we are going further into the Cold War and not coming to a solution. Your views on this, and then we'll see how do we get there.
बहुत इंटरेस्टिंग आपने बात सुनाई है इस वक्त. दो तीन चीजों के ऊपर मैं टिप्पणी करूंगा खास तौर पे. चाइना का हमको मालूम है सिस्टम क्या है, किस तरह से लड़ाई लड़ते हैं वो. इसको जितना पढ़ा जाए उतना ही ज्यादा इसके ऊपर माहिरता मिलती है. फॉर एग्जाम्पल ग्रे जोन वॉरफेयर का जो कॉन्सेप्ट है उनका, कि हर चीज को दोगला रखो, किसी चीज के ऊपर डेफिनेटिव मत करो. डोंट कमिट योरसेल्फ टू अ डेफिनेट लाइन ऑफ स्ट्रेटेजिक थिंकिंग एट ऑल. ठीक है, इम्पोज ऑन योर एडवर्सरीज, ऑल योर एडवर्सरीज, a hot and cold in terms of what messaging that you are doing to them. ये खासियत है. ग्लोबल टाइम्स का पहला रिस्पॉन्स जिंजरली बड़ा बड़ा पॉजिटिव था, मगर जैसे आप सही कह रहे हैं, ये जो चीजें उन्होंने लिखी हैं ये भी इतनी एडवर्सियल नहीं है, मगर एक डाउट, एक सवाल पैदा करने के लिए दिमाग में डालते हैं इंटरनेशनल लीडरशिप्स के अंदर. ये खासियत जो चाइना की है, ये तो पहली चीज हमको देखनी पड़ेगी. तो इसलिए हमको इससे कभी काउट डाउन नहीं होना चाहिए. क्योंकि देखिए, अब क्या अगर आप देखें भी तो प्राइम मिनिस्टर मोदी का जो पॉजिटिव स्टेटमेंट आया है, इट्स कम आउट ऑफ द ब्लू. मिस्टर मोदी कुड हैव आल्सो बीन नेगेटिव, बिकॉज मोस्ट ऑफ चाइना's, जो कुछ चाइना से निकल रहा था सब कुछ ज्यादा नेगेटिव था भारत के बारे में. एंड प्राइम मिनिस्टर मोदी हिमसेल्फ कुड हैव बीन नेगेटिव, बट ही डिड नॉट चूज टू डू. He chose to put in a positive thought process into it and await responses. एक तो इसकी वजह जो मैं समझ रहा हूं वो ये है कि 4 जून को जब रिजल्ट डिक्लेयर होंगे, anticipated that the current government will come back into power, they want to make an early beginning on the issue of China. अगर 2047 को देखते हैं वे India is a Viksit Bharat or a developed country, etc., then time is not on our side. We need a relative period of stability. और ये जो चीन के साथ अनबन जो है, ये भारत के ऊपर रुकावट डाल रही है. So I think much like what Prime Minister Modi did in 2014, कि उन्होंने पहले शुरू में पाकिस्तान को पहले क्वाइट रखा, फिर इनिशिएटिव शुरू किया, जब देखा कि रिस्पॉन्स नहीं आया, then he went a little more proactive against Pakistan. Similarly, 2019 में शुरू में उन्होंने अपने एक्शंस ले लिए. Immediately 5th of August को जो डिसीजन लिया था कश्मीर का, etc., in the beginning, the early part of his government. That is the style of the Prime Minister perhaps. और अब कुछ perhaps चाह रहे हैं कि जो भी चीन के साथ होगा, अगले सरकार में उनके चीन के ऊपर बहुत ज्यादा एम्फेसिस होगा. Because if we return back to some kind of a cooperation with China, definitely the path to 2047 is going to be clearer to us. So I think this is something जो प्राइम मिनिस्टर मोदी ने कोशिश शुरू की है. रिस्पॉन्स अभी तक नेगेटिव, कोल्ड एंड हॉट दोनों आए हैं, कोई डेफिनेटिव नहीं आया, और इट विल टेक द बेटर पार्ट ऑफ 6 months बिफोर इट कम्स. इन 6 महीनों में मेरे ख्याल में कुछ ना कुछ अमेरिकन इलेक्शंस, आप समझिए कुछ ना कुछ तो बदलाव आएगा पूरी दुनिया में. यूक्रेन वॉर में, गाजा की लड़ाई में क्या होगा, इन सब चीजों में कुछ बदलाव आएगा. अमेरिकन शिफ्ट टुवर्ड्स इंडो पैसिफिक व्हिच इज इम्पेंडिंग फॉर सम टाइम नाउ, दैट शिफ्ट विल आल्सो टेक प्लेस. फॉर ऑल दिस इंडिया मस्ट बी प्रिपेयर्ड. एंड मैं समझता हूं कि ये जो स्टेप्स, ये जो प्रोएक्टिव जो स्टेटमेंट प्राइम मिनिस्टर मोदी ने दिया है, इस सब चीजों को ध्यान में रखते हुए दिया है. ऑल्सो कमिंग डाउन टू द एस्पेक्ट, चाइना की खासियत है कि जो मीडिया के अंदर, वी आर ऑल अवेयर ऑफ द 3 वॉरफेयर स्ट्रैटेजी, दिस होल इशू ऑफ साइबर, लीगल एंड मीडिया इज अ वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट टूल फॉर देम. एंड थ्रू मीडिया दे लाइक टू टॉक डाउन. भारत के साथ खास तौर पे वो ऊपर से नीचे पेरेंट टू चाइल्ड अप्रोच के साथ बात करते हैं, to cow us down in our thinking overall. Indian media responds very awkwardly, and our leadership does not really know how to respond. तो ये खासियत है चीन की, और we should be a little more proactive about it and not be led into traps, because ये सब traps हैं around us to sort of tie us down in our strategic thinking overall. Time has come for a much clearer strategic environment that India wants to look at, and our thinking must be accordingly matching.
Right, sir. I also agree with you completely that if we have to rise and continue our rise unimpeded, we have to get China off our backs. If not China off our backs, at least we need to have peace on the Chinese border. And some modicum, some of modus vivendi with China, so that they go their way, we go our way. We have no issues with them. And that's the way forward. Well, be that as it may, and you're right that is our at least the midterm outlook which we should have. Long term, we'll see. And like you rightly said, every time our prime minister in the first initial part of his tenure, he did it in the last 2 tenures also. A new initiative he started, and this is the pre-initiative of that whole story, that is reaching out to China. What do you think should be the response of the Indian strategic community? Because I think the Indian strategic community, the Indian media, and everyone, we need to come up to speed on the way we look at these strategic issues. And I'll tell you why. Because most of the time, in fact, most of the questions which I keep getting on this show is, when will China attack us? How will China attack us? Do we have enough troops to ward them off? Will China is such a big economy? Can we handle them? For some reason, I feel that though we have gained a lot of strategic confidence post 2020 and our rise, there is a certain amount of hesitancy on the part of our political leadership, as also our military leadership, to take it to the next level. How do you get over this? And I'm not looking at a politico-military bureaucratic fusion, because that, I think, is the cornerstone of our going up. And of course, your media and all that. I think we need to look forward. Your views on this?
Actually, this is the whole gamut of Sino-Indian relations. I'll try and put it together.
Yeah, yes, sir.
Few words, not too
small,
much.
Small points.
You see, it is inevitable. The hangover of 1962 continues. Despite the fact that we always quote how quickly in 1967 we overcame it, 1986 in Sundarangchu we overcame it, it never came down to actual war fighting, really saying. So that little bit of a thing, chip on our shoulder, continues to remain there. It happens with the best of nations. We have overcome our asymmetry to a very large extent. if you really look at it, capability wise, although here and there is a lot of asymmetry, no doubt about it, but assurance of winnability is not there for with the Chinese. That should be very, very clear. I think the international community also generally recognizes it. We should not hesitate to allocate more and more resources to the strategic sector in terms of whatever nuclearization, technologies, uh, better infrastructure, better orbats, whatever we have for structuring. We need to ensure that we don't hold back on this because this is going to be the strength. We are not looking at deterrence. We are looking at capability development basically to send home a clear message, right? I don't count this as pure deterrence. Deterrence is more of a offensive kind
Defensive
of
ways.
impact. Yeah, go ahead. Right? I look at it this way, right? So, and in terms of strategic thinking, there's been a sea change since over the last 20 years, I'd say. We have a lot of China experts today. A lot of people are looking very deeply into it. In fact, Pakistan is a virtual forgotten story. Once in a while, you and I keep reviving it to make sure that our, you know, tentacles are still out. But it's the Chinese front that we continue to look at. Uh, I'm not sure if the understanding, political understanding, in the political circles, I'm actually surprised many times when I do interact with some senior people of the political leadership, etc. Their understanding is very good. There needs to be a greater synchronization, perhaps, between the military leadership and the political leadership in its overall understanding, because that commonality of thinking, the way the thinking is about Pakistan, the similar thinking should exist about China. And we should be upfront to state it in any meeting that we have with political leaderships, with bureaucracy, etc., to tell them that our capability ultimately is what will dictate, right? Therefore, if you hold back on resources, if you hold back on budgeting, then we are not going to arrive there, right? This is a very important part of making sure that this fusion that we talk about in most of our programs. We've been talking about the military, civil bureaucracy, political leadership, which must happen. This is the essentiality in it to get the thinking correct. Once that happens, then you find the right statements in the media, etc. And the Indian media must be brought on board to speak more maturely. You see, I agree we are not a communist country. We are a democracy, and democracies, the media are free to speak. It's not like the Global Times or something like that. But I personally feel, and particularly electronic media, we need to be a little more, uh, should I say, drawn down on this until we are really in that position where we can talk much more proactively. Right? In writing, I think the print media has done a very good job of messaging, of the Indian strategic messaging which is required. But this jingoism, which is there in the Indian electronic media, and the Chinese are themselves pointing it out to us many times. Whoever I have met from China, they do point out this aspect to them to us. So if we have to look at potential friendship, even a period of cold peace, cold war, etc., which will set the stage for the future as such, I think on all these fronts we need a little proactivity to change our minds and thinking.
Yeah, I think so, sir. And I think one more aspect where we need to rev up is our think tanks.
Yeah,
We don't have enough think tanks which talk of China, which read China, which discuss China, and which, you know, talk a lot about China with depth, with that understanding, which I'm actually, to be very honest, a little disappointed. I'll give you an example. Recently, China made a big reform, or rather, they announced it as a big reform of their information support force, which is made into a force, independent arm. And I heard a lot of our senior officers in Delhi talking, "Oh, this needs to be analyzed. They have done something great, all that." And I was a little, and there were a lot of strategic thinkers around, and they all said, "Oh, this is something which China keeps doing and all that." And I was astounded for the simple reason that if one studies this whole story, the information support force always existed as part of the PLA strategic support force. It was part of it. What they have done is they've split it into three, and such trepidation of something new which China has done comes out of lack of knowledge about China. And that is what actually worries me. How do you get out of this trap with our own think tanks and people talking about China or not talking about China?
Are we first of all focusing sufficiently on China? I think 220, Doklam and 2020 both triggered off brief periods in which these things were spoken about. More research work. I've been personally involved with some writing work, ministries, etc., uh, analyzing deeply, looking at these aspects with China, etc. I'm not a China scholar myself at all, but I've been forced to read a lot of late. I think it will take a little more time. Our thinking and reading on Pakistan was also, if you remember, not very intense. Uh, in the Indian Armed Forces, there is a sea change taking place today where a tremendous amount of interest in strategic reading and thinking, etc., has started emerging. But the problem is, these are all one off seminars you attend, and frankly saying, most of these seminars, Jan Shankar, you and I will probably both agree on this, that these seminars achieve very little. They are mostly devoted to first 3 hours of catering to VIP requirements, etc., and then the rest of the day is wasted with a few sprinkling of officers and people from somewhere and fillers. A lot of people filling up the gaps there. This is not how we can enhance our strategic thinking. We got to take it down to the academy level. And a lot of people debate with me and say, academy, you only need to teach them sub-level tactics and nothing else. I say, no, that's the place where you have to start making them think that they are beyond everyone else. They are the people who can fight wars on the ground, and they are the ones who can wield their pens and research, look at technology with equal ease everywhere. It is from there that the strategic culture will rise. It will take a fair amount of time. We can keep doing this bits and pieces of plastering here and there, picking up some experts within academia. Even within academia, there are very, very restricted number of people who can actually give you an opinion which is highly strategic in nature. Even if you ask military people, their opinion will be only militaristic, very, very little bit on which is holistically strategic as such. So I do think from an intellectual angle, we are still quite far from it. And we need to put much more pressure, we need to put much more emphasis on this as a whole. This is something for the leaderships of the three armed forces to look at very, very seriously.
Yeah, I think so. So it's not only the leadership of the armed forces. I think even the political leadership has to think very seriously. क्योंकि अगर आप you see, I mean, I just want to share this with all of you. Other day, I got a comment to say that YouTube is the new TV. People don't watch the TV, people watch YouTube. And it is on YouTube that a lot of think tanks I see, foreign think tanks, are giving their analysis about China. I'm just talking China specific. But I don't see enough Indian YouTubers, Indian think tanks on the YouTube. And if they do come, it is not followed. And in fact, it is only for this reason that on Gunner Shot, every second day, I talk of China. No, in some form or the other. Like yesterday, day before yesterday, I did speak of China, and I did speak of the topic we are discussing, India and China Cold War, and how we are this thing. And today we are discussing it again from a different viewpoint, so that people get 2, 3 viewpoints on this business of Cold War or no Cold War or whatever it is. And I feel that we need to do more on this issue, and I have no doubt about it. Okay. So with this, I have generally finished with what I had to cover. If you have anything else to say or talk of on this business of Cold War or Cold Peace and what it is, fine. Otherwise, I'll take a few questions. Sir.
I think there's some very good questions waiting. I can see them in the comments
Sir,
section. So go to
sir.
let's take the questions, man.
Yeah. Uh, yeah. He says, sir, would you say that instead of cold peace or cold war, we are actually seeing a WW, warm war, as I call it, because things are gradually heating, warming up everywhere. Mine is the war generation.
Yours
Your
is
take,
not the
sir.
war generation. Please,
Yeah.
please. I differ with you. Yours is not the war generation. These wars you're seeing in you know Gaza or Ukraine, etc., are not. These are not wars which are affecting the whole world as such. I mean, I reserve my comments on that. But the point is, the world is increasingly more conscious of the need for peace. Because you see, we all realize the moment something happens in a networked world, in a flat world, everyone gets affected. With what's happened in Gaza, you are saying something happens between Iran and Israel. The next time, probably you'll find prices of energy going shooting beyond anything what you can even contemplate. So I do think everyone is conscious of this and being very careful about it, right? A gesture such as what our prime minister has just made, I think, is more in the realm of looking at reality. You see, it takes a lot for a leader of a nation as large as ours, and an emerging important nation as ours, to make the same effort all over again. In 2014 onwards, he started with a brave effort to find peace with China. China sort of gave a stab in the back to India to go back again and do it. I think it needs courage. It needs tremendous courage to do it. Let's back the prime minister on this. Let's believe him. I think because
Yeah.
I think I think what he is saying and what he's attempting to do is the right thing at this time. The Chinese may not respond when he says it, but eventually they too will realize it.
Yeah, I think so, sir, because it takes a lot of political courage, not normal courage, political courage, and investment to make such a statement. It's not easy. Uh, he says Cold War is war via proxy means Cuba, Korea, Vietnam, Congo, Chile, Angola, etc. are the nations where these wars were fought indirectly by Soviet and US. What I feel he says is, look, today it's not a Cold War in that classic sense. But my view, sir, and I'll seek your views after that, is today's the whole definition of Cold War has changed. We are looking at a multi-domain system where you're going to things don't operate in one domain only. And like I showed that map earlier, which we there's an outreach both ways, right, across the Indonesian by China and across the Western Pacific by India. So we have to start looking at this whole story a little differently. So your take on this, because I think this is a fundamental question which he's throwing at us.
You are right. Cold War. I mean, we saw the Cold War from 1946 to 1991. 45 years of it, and I very correctly identified, as Mr. Aju has just done, proxies in different parts of the world, the whole of Africa. We saw civil wars all over Africa which were taking place. The time the Cold War ended, and the international system had a sense of strategic balance because the Cold War also existed at that time. The two poles balanced each other, and the moment that fell apart, you found these wars in Africa, etc., etc., took off for some time before eventually they subsided. Now, in this particular period, actually, we are looking at not a unipolar world. Actually, we are looking at a emerging multipolar world, and there are going to be multiple interests of these multiple nations. Among them, China, Russia. Of course, economically, Russia does not sort of match that. But China, Russia, the United States, the European Union, India, Japan, they're going to make These are the countries which are going to make a difference in the future. Relationships between them in this period are going to continue remaining primarily in the mode of testing each other. And as I said, blocks, big blocks. So the next Cold War could possibly be one block, the blocks that we identified just now, Shankar and myself, we identified it could be that, or it could also be actually what a lot of people talk about, civilizational aspects. We still haven't resolved the problem of global terror. We haven't resolved the problem of Islamic radicalism. That's another area which is waiting to explode if it happens so otherwise. So it's not just a simple Cold War of communism sorry, against against the democratic, the Christian Western democratic system which existed for those 45 years. It's not just that. It is this time it is multiple conflicts between nations which are emerging, and therefore the unpredictability part of it is much higher. It's not just this aspect of proxy. Of course, proxies will continue in different ways. The manner in the wars will be fought in the Middle East will probably have a lot of proxies being fought between different countries. What will happen in Southeast Asia could similarly be there. I don't see any clarity emerging in this, in the manner in which that bipolar Cold War took place in those 45 years. This is going to be a much more complex Cold War because ideologies themselves are not important here. There is much more about economic gains, strategic gains related to it.
Right, sir. There are two questions on trust. I'll put it together. Whichever way we look at China, it is predatory and given opportunity has always stabbed Bharat in the back. Present border situation does not elicit confidence. Your views. The next thing is how to trust China and why should we trust China at all after the Maldives saga? So it's an issue of trust and the lack of trust between China and India, especially after the fact that not only in 62 they stabbed us in the back, they repeated it in 2017 and 2020. How do we trust them? That's the larger question, sir.
Very good question. Put together also together that makes a lot of sense. And we started our whole discussion on the basis of the trust deficit that we were talking about. How does therefore one build trust? Which should be a natural question actually here. Very difficult. It's not going to be easy at all. We are not looking at a period of 2, 3, 4, 5 years. It's going to be baby steps and a lot of give and take. Uh, you saw what happened after the Cold War. Uh, the United States and Russia initially seemed to be on a reasonably good footing in terms of trust at that particular time. The United States helped Russia recover much of its economy in many ways. Of course, the Americans also benefited hugely from that. But at the end of the day, you saw that eastward march, which continued towards the near abroad region of Russia. That is something on which the Americans and NATO did not compromise, and that is what finally led to the Ukraine war. So while you are promoting each other's interests, there will inevitably be a second kind of a parallel rail which will be going on which your strategic relationship will be managed. That's a very difficult call. Very difficult call between nations who have fought wars. One of the few places where things have been really set right, and I really sometimes marvel at them, is the Egyptian-Israeli uh, equation. The Egyptians have really found ways by making sure that their thinking turned positive. Otherwise, with what is happening in Gaza today and things like that, Egypt was the first country to be embroiled in this. It didn't happen, right? When you got your long-term interest very clear, when you are very clear that you want to benefit your people, right? You want to deliver to your people at the end of it, war fighting should be the last thing which should come to your mind. War fighting for the purpose of resources, etc. No. Cooperation for resources. is far, far better. It's surprising that soldiers speak this. We are soldiers who speak this. We realize it that war fighting is meant for extreme situations. The second thing which gives me confidence sometimes is the Chinese do this as a sham act. They have a tendency to show bravado. Doing this thing of bringing in troops into Eastern Ladakh, suddenly doing a walk-in operation somewhere here, doing a transgression in some place like that. This is all a part of muscularity, and they feel very happy that India does not respond to that. Right? If we start responding in
Yeah,
equal measure, completely in equal measure, I can assure you, whatever little trust there is which exists at the moment, that will vanish completely, and we will be enemies forever. We are at the moment also adversaries. We are not friends, we are adversaries. In fact, the biggest problem of the India China relationship is that it's not clear whether we are friends, adversaries, partners, or collaborators. Do we collaborate with each other? What are we? I think it's best left to the grey. Leave it to the grey.
yeah,
The moment you
yeah,
try starting to define, this is how the relationship should be, etc., we'll spin circles around ourselves. The Chinese like to
yeah.
leave it like this. The Chinese are grey zone people. Let's deal with them in that manner.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. We have to get this slide back to understand. We are somewhere in between. We are neither there's a hot war, nor neither there's a hot peace, neither there's a cold war, nor a cold peace. We are somewhere in between,
In
hanging
fact, this
around.
arrow is a
Uh,
spinning. The arrow is spinning most
Spinning, yeah.
times.
The arrow is spinning most of the time. It is not stable, and we have to be alive to the situation at every point of time and see if you can look ahead and then make things happen for yourself. If we give too much to the Chinese, we will lose. If we don't give too much to the Chinese, also we will lose. We have to have that confidence to be able to judge Chinese and place them where they are and handle them accordingly. Right. So there's a different kind of a question. He says, China says USA should back off. That's what is the recent talk between Xi Jinping and Blinken. There is space for superpowers. Can we trust USA considering they have inconfident woke youth and their economy is stagnating? The second parts I'll discount whether it's woke youth or economy is stagnating is subjective because economies of USA it varies by 2 3 months. It's not a big deal for me. But the first factor, trust of China, USA, is the bigger issue which we need to talk of.
That's the main issue. That's the main issue. That aspect of trust with the USA. If we talk of trust with China, why not talk about trust with the United States and America too? Um, Relationships are not just built on good receptions on national days and things like that. Okay, you may see a lot of hugs taking place, exchanges of flags and things like that. Uh, Diasporas existing there also is definitely an indicator of a certain amount of trust, etc. But at the end of the day, national interest always plays supreme. That is what is supreme. We have seen it in the case of Pakistan-US relations or US-Pakistan relations, right? Every time that uh, the US has sort of uh, backed off from Pakistan, it's come back after some time. Some of that's because of the geostrategic location. Also, it's come back invariably. From the status of a frontline state, diluted suddenly, and then return again when things have happened. So it's been a meandering, dynamic kind of a relationship between the United States and Pakistan too. Our relationship through the 60s, 70s, and 80s was always in doubt. I mean, the Americans were very peeved with us because of our very, very independent way of looking at things, right? And our and their inability to break into our stranglehold, into our systems as such. They somehow never liked our sense of independent thinking, non-alignment, and things like that of that period. Today, our relationship is very good because of mutual interests. And this is what always happens in international relations. Mutual relationships, existence of diaspora, um, uh, the aspect of arms uh, and technologies, technology exchanges, and things like that, which has all added to it. Tomorrow, let's say we find peace with China. Can the strength of this relationship remain the same? If there's a transformational relationship built up with China, let's say, hypothetically, can this relationship exist with the United States? Well, so far, in the last couple of 2 3 years, they've shown that India can remain somewhere midway between Russia and the United States, right? They have convincingly trusted us in this, but I'm not sure that if a wholesale change of strategic balance takes place, I'm not sure if the United States will be so happy about it and would trust India to retain and continue with that kind of a relationship with China. There would be a dilution in the Indo-US relationship. So ultimately, it all comes down to national interest. Ultimately, it's that.
Yeah. So, okay. Okay. The next question, which is very interesting, it's a criticism on the army officers, but I'll still take it. Why are there so many unfit senior people in our army? When we see them on TV, it really disappoints me. Uh, I'll take this not from the physical unfitness point of view. I'll look at it from the fact that maybe what they say on TV sounds a little disappointing. But I'll also put it in context that when you go to the TV, I'm asking you because you've been on TV quite a few times, and I think you were the best person to put it on in perspective. When you go on TV in a panel of 5 to 6, invariably there's a lot of tutu meme, and the real subject gets sidetracked, and the army officer or the retired army officer or the veteran who goes there barely gets some space to talk, unless it's to a few people like you. So I think you have to put this whole perception of this gentleman in the right frame. So your take.
I'm not sure whether Mr. Khakkar is talking about physical fitness or he's talking about intellectual fitness,
I
right?
think he's
But
talking
I
more of
presume it's
intellectual.
intellectual. I presume it's intellectual
Intellectual.
fitness. And yes, you've raised a very, very good question if you have raised that issue. Because on the physical fitness part of it, we can keep commenting, and that's an individual thing, right? But taking the system as such, yes, a lot of people tell me that they are very disappointed with people who come on television, the kind of things they speak, etc. My take is television channels primarily work on provocation. They provoke you, right? And if you are willing to go there every day, putting on your medals and your cap, etc. I don't know why people put on their medals and their caps at all. First of all, they go there, get and then are ready to get provoked, right? When they see two politicians speaking in loud terms, etc., they also start speaking in similar terms, right? It's awkward. What you got to remember is what is your background? How have you been brought up? Who is observing you? The very same officers who you commanded are observing you today, right? If you can't hold your own in an intellectual discussion, intellectually, if you can't hold your own, there's no reason for you to go there. I follow certain principles. Let me tell you. When someone rings me up and I can't go, I'm not in a position to go. I've got some work outside or maybe a social engagement, etc. I've got a set of people. General Shankar has just experienced it the other day. I just rang up one channel to say, please get back to General Shankar, right? Because I know who will speak sense there. So I make sure that I recommend the right people to go there, right? Secondly, in most of the channels, as I said, provocation is the problem. Speak minimal, make a reputation around yourself. Make a reputation to say that you cannot be provoked, and secondly, that you will not handle political questions. I have never commented politically. You ask me a strategic question, you ask me something related to the armed forces, ask me anything on geopolitics of the world. including Indian policy towards it. I'll speak about it. But I'm not going to speak politics here. That's not how we were brought up in the armed forces, right? We, we were very clear what we spoke at the dining table in the mess also. We were very, very clear about it. So if these principles are dear to you, and is you are only looking for popularity through what the awkward statements that you make, then please continue to do so. And unfortunately, you'll only cut a sorry figure. The last part. If you don't have expertise on that subject, don't go there. Do you find me coming and speaking about economics? I don't know economics too well. I don't go and speak there. With General Shankar, I discuss Pakistan. I discuss Middle East because I know Middle East very well. I discuss China. That's the subject which I love to study. I love to discuss political Islam, radicalism, global terror, etc. These are subjects in which we have been steeped, right? But out of the blue, your orientation is completely China-based, and suddenly out of the blue you start talking about the maritime zone of which you know nothing. Obviously, you're going to cut a sorry figure.
Yeah.
So therefore, this is my advice to a lot of people. A lot of people who are, coming into this whole gamut of TV talks, analyses, etc. That's the way to do it. Yeah.
Yeah. So the last question I'll take, and after that, it's an interesting question, but it's it. So you said China is expanding its nuclear arsenal and letting the world know it publicly. Yes, it is. They all publicly stated that we're going to take it up to 1,000 warheads. Question: is Bharat in reply expanding our nuclear arsenal for parity with versus China? And part two. Uh, so before I like your comment, but I'll make a statement of fact. Look, we don't need parity. Parity is never an answer in the nuclear
Exactly.
equation. The second thing is you don't have to always advertise that you're going to increase your nuclear arsenal. We recently fired an Agni with MIRV. The moment you have a Agni with MIRV, it has to have a warhead. If it has to have a warhead, it will have a nuclear warhead. MIRVs are all nuclear warhead. Automatically, it is increased. It is a logical step-by-step process. So this is the thing. So your views, and after that, this is the last
I,
question.
I
I'm not
think
taking.
I have always maintained this, that bragging and talking about nuclear capability, nuclear resources, etc., is the I don't think it's in the realm of reality that mature people, ever talk about it. These are not weapons of war fighting. We are all aware these are weapons of deterrence. If you have got 100 warheads and I've got 10, I assure you there is reasonable parity. It's very correctly said by General Shankar just now. You don't have to compare. I've got 91 and you got 100, and therefore I'm more powerful or less powerful. No. Throwing one nuclear weapon at the other will take a decision which is left to the gods. That is the kind of decision which will happen. And then I assure you, either we are looking at nuclear winter, where you find a complete massive retaliation, or a measured one, right? So no one needs to talk about this. I think even China is being very awkward talking about it. I think that they're trying to send home a message to the Americans, right? That, don't consider that Russia's arsenal is very, very archaic and things like that. We too have it, and we have so many warheads available with us. They're trying to do that. Eventually, whoever has got nuclear weapons has got a certain capability, right? You saw what the Pakistanis achieved from 1974 till 1998, 24 years of keeping the zone, the whole thing in the gray. Do we have it? No, we don't have it. Yes, we have it. We haven't got it. It carried on for 24 years until finally in 1998, the thing became transparent, right? So the whole gamut of nuclear warfare, nuclear capability, etc., that you do not have to spell it out in black and white terms to show your power. I think the Chinese will probably accept and agree with us that this is an aspect of strategic immaturity.
Yeah, I think so, sir. we'll call it a day here. I thought we had some good conversation. We went into things which are in future, and we have given a lot of food for thought for how we need to handle India-China relations in the future, right? And I see more of such talk coming up ahead because times are changing, governments are changing, and this is the year of elections. It is not only in India; it's also going to take place in USA and a whole lot of other places. Places like Taiwan already has taken place. Next week, the new president of Taiwan is going to take over. So a lot of equations are changing globally. So I think we are in for interesting times. And sir, thanks a lot for your expose on this. And I think you gave very good insight into how we should handle our future. Thanks a lot. And I thought the questions also were very
Very,
good.
very good.
The
Very, very
final
good
words,
question.
and then we'll say Jai Hind. Your final words, and we'll say Jai Hind, sir.
Thank you once again for conducting this program, because and to all our viewers also. Thank you for being there. Uh, my personal thing is I have no political orientation, but I strongly feel that messaging, this is something which Prime Minister Modi has very well understood. The power of communication strategy. One doesn't make one doesn't give messages at that level of government or that level of leadership without a subtle meaning in it. And these messages need to be picked up adequately, to be understood. I thought what had happened in this case was that this very important message had not been adequately picked up and looked at, either by the international community or by the Indian strategic community. The New York Times, to my mind, I think came out with their statements even after I had published my article. So I'm glad that you chose to have this program, because this sends across a larger understanding of strategic maturity.
Thanks a lot, sir. Thanks for everyone who's watched this. Good evening and Jai Hind to all of you. Uh, Tomorrow we'll
All
come and talk of something completely new and different, sir. Good evening, sir.